meeting at 7 p.m. And I've neglected to pull up my remote participation speech, so yeah, a second on that. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote participation by board members and members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item, the public hearings, and any other matter for which the board allows public participation will be via the Zoom raise hand feature or a hand in the room. If you raise your hand on Zoom, you will be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. Every vote tonight will be taken by roll call. Please note that this meeting is being recorded as well as being broadcast live on the Grafton Community Government channel. I'll begin this meeting like always by taking a roll call of the board. Mr. Robbins.
Present.
Mr. Hassinger.
I'm here.
Ms. Hassinger.
Here.
Mr. Venkatraman has told us he'll be missing tonight. Maura McCormack.
Here.
Chris McGoldrick, staff.
Present.
And Natalia Allward.
Present.
Thank you. Now, our first item on our agenda is public input. If anyone has something to bring up to the board's attention that's not already on the agenda in another way, now would be the time to do so, either in the room or over Zoom. Seeing none, that brings us to our first agenda item, which is a continuation from the 3rd of October regarding Stillwater Estates 11 Wheeler Road. We were talking about the Grafton Land Trust trail and drainage for this. Chris, do we have anything from your side?
Yep, so I have a brief update. I did do a site visit with Graves Engineering to view the condition of the site. Of note, the drainage system seems to be constructed per the plan and as designed. It was noted that the grass has not yet taken root on a large portion of it that may be affecting some of the siltation. Certainly it's a in process construction site, and the compacted soils now are in terms of water flows are more like concrete or a paved surface, and it's not going to slow the flow rates as it will be in a finished condition. Obviously that's something that is just part of normal construction sites and is I'm sure being addressed. It was also noted that there's a number of cellar holes that have started to be dug. Frankly, Graves expressed that those are likely assisting in the drainage. They act somewhat like temporary detention basins by collecting some of the storm water. But certainly something that the board should remain aware of, and that Graves will be continuing to monitor and address. I did speak briefly with Graves, and there's some potential modifications that can be done either on a temporary basis or more permanently to assist with the design of that. But again, those would be something that would have to be worked out between the two parties in terms of a modification to the plans. Although there might be some minor field work that can be done for a temporary assistance on the drainage issues. So that being the case, I believe the parties were, last we heard, we're getting fairly close to having some form of a resolution on the property, and I anticipate they may have some things to discuss tonight. We received some correspondence early in this afternoon.
Thank you. Go ahead, Bob.
Mike?
Hello?
Oh, Bob.
Bob. Yes.
Yeah. I noticed that we got a letter from the Land Trust today talking about what the situation is out there. And it doesn't quite agree. I imagine they're going to explain. I don't understand. I'm not clear what drawings exactly they included, though. I don't think they were in the plan set that we signed, so I don't know where that comes from, but they show plans that they say don't match what's out there. So,
Come on up.
Michael Sawarda, 32 Barbara Jean Street, Grafton. I'm here representing the Grafton Land Trust from Peters and Sawarda. I wanted to do two things. I know we have two agenda items on tonight.
Yes.
I'm going to sort of combine my comments just for the sake of brevity of time. I do want to preface my remarks by saying I actually was very surprised by Mr. McGoldrick's report, in that one of the things that we have noted is that there should have been a siltation forebay set up with guardians and about 4 feet high, and based upon at least the pictures that we obtained from drone footage that we took, that was not in the basin as of last week. So unless there's been some major work done within the last 4 or 5 days, I don't agree that the construction of the drainage system complies with the plan. Having said that, I have had discussions with Attorney Knappich over the last couple of days, in fact, as late as this afternoon. I'm happy to report we do have some progress on getting some type of consensus around an agreement. It's basics, and since we haven't agreed on anything, Bob and I talked earlier today, I'm going to be a little bit general, but it would involve expanding and widening the ripraps, both at the dispersion pipe or the outlet where it comes out, the land trust property, and also below the overflow riprap, that those would be extended out further and widened so that it comes down further based upon discussions with our engineer. That'll both help to slow velocity, but also tend to disperse any direct flow, so it'll hit the trail over a little bit of a wider area. Secondly, we do want the siltation barrier in forebay finished. We think that will substantially help in the siltation coming out, and may well help to diminish flow just a little bit as far as its. Third, we have worked with our engineer to come up with a new avenue for us to take care of the trail and install ADA compliant, but would be much more resistant to erosion. We've talked about a couple of different surfaces, pavers, the new tic-tac-toe plates that you put down in infill, which we think would stem the erosion and also comply with the ADA requirements that we have complete. And I know Rob Aberg's here tonight. He's been to all of the hearings he's had with Concom and also ADA with regard to having that correct. And the last component, we would grant them a drainage easement if all this comes together. I do want to know for the record that my brother attorney does not believe they do need a drainage easement. He and I will disagree on that, but we're going to work to get them an easement. And there would also be some component of a donation to the land trust in order to offset some of the costs of the ADA compliant trails. So we're making good progress. I think Bob would agree that we had a good call this afternoon.
Yeah, I don't want to disagree with anything Attorney
Yeah.
Sawarda said. In principle, I think it's fair to say that there's.
Microphone so they can hear you better on the.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll repeat what I said. I don't disagree with anything that Attorney Sawarda said in principle. That's all sort of came about within the last several business days. However, I mean, it's a note of cautious optimism. There's some ways to go. I don't think we're quite on the cusp of it, but I said to you at the last meeting that we were willing to negotiate in good faith, and I think that's what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a little bit less optimistic than I was, but that's why everybody has attorneys, I guess. I do want to talk just briefly about the lot release. Based upon what we haven't seen at the siltation forebay is not, it really it's just been a riprap put in. There is erosion in the bay. I do have photos of that if the board's interested in taking a look at them, but I think Rob posted them on the planning board site, so you may have seen them already. Since we're relatively close, I think closer than he thinks we are, but I think we've got the makings of a deal. I would hope that the board wouldn't change the position of anything until we tell you that we've got some conclusion to that, because clearly the drainage system is, in our opinion, is not complete. And we do have members of the land trust here tonight. I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to add. Rob?
Did you want to talk about the drainage basin? This is Rob Aberg, 43 South Street. Or do you want to hold off on that?
Bob, did you want to chime in now, or do you want to let Rob?
I just had a question for Attorney Swerda.
I'm back, Bob.
I think what you said was, don't grant the lot releases tonight.
That would be our request, yes.
Okay. The way you said it is lawyer.
I apologize. That's what I do for a living.
Okay.
And I'll just say I didn't mention it out loud, but I will consider taking the lot release quest as the coupled with this, so we don't have to split it. It makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, so Rob Aberg again, 43 South Street for the record. Yeah, so the letter I sent Saturday is in reference to the plan that's recorded and signed by the planning board. It's survey book 960, plan 84. That's, I believe, the definitive design, if I'm not mistaken. And I pulled excerpts out of that to show the 4-foot high by 3-foot thick basket that you can see in the drone shots, if anybody wants to pull them up, that there is no structure that's 4 feet high, 3 feet thick, and 40 feet long, or however long that U-shape is. That's not in evidence at all anywhere in the basin. So that would need to be installed to be make the basin comply with the signed plan. As well, we're concerned that the grass is not growing on the slope, the 20% slope that leads down into that area. And given the late date in the season for growing grass or other vegetation, I don't always have grass in my yard, but I mow it. We believe that in consultation with engineer Norm Hill, that it would be in need of hay or some other stabilizing feature to survive the winter without significant erosion occurring that would then add sediment to the basin. You can also see in the drone shots that I sent to you that the large gravel that's already in place is already filled up with silt in some areas and is already needed maintenance. I took the liberty, my printer didn't cooperate, of printing out the stormwater manual from and report, a lovely 81-page discussion of hydrology simulations that shows the water flow expected can exceed by a factor of 2 the amount of water that comes out of Tower 1 fire truck. So that's just out of the discharge pipe. This is a large amount of water we're talking about when we get spring runoff, rains, floods, and other things that weren't modeled in this extensive report. I think the board needs to take that very seriously, that this that the soil conditions and current state of the silt forebay is not such that the basin is ready for use. I know when I turn on the electricity at a site, it has to be inspected. In discussion with Natalia today, there have been no inspections by the building department, and I'm surprised to hear that Graves Engineering declared that the basin is constructed per the recorded plan. I don't see that at all, and I brought photographic evidence of that we can review if you'd like.
So, I mean, I guess I'd like to clarify. In visiting with Graves, they did not have a concern about the construction of the site to date, from my understanding. Again, I can't speak for Graves. I rely on their comments in terms of engineering and what's been constructed. Certainly, having received the letter today, I'd be more than happy to forward it to Graves, which I'll be doing anyways, and get their thoughts on the matter. Again, I think they've been monitoring the site. In terms of the site visit or the permits from building, I would not expect any building permits to be issued at this point, since we haven't issued any lot releases to this point. Typically, Graves Engineering does provide site visit reports, so there may have been a miscommunication in terms of that. the building department would not manage the site until permits under their purview have been issued. So
With respect to the drainage, the drainage element of this discussion, it's my, I gather from, the two attorneys here that we're somewhere close to having an agreement between the parties. And the question I would have respect to that, understanding that you still got a few details to nail down with that. At this time, is there any action required or requested from this board? I'm going to guess that when the details are finalized, there may be a plan revision that would be provided, and that at that time we would determine whether that was a minor or major modification. But at this time, that's still to be determined, if I understand things correctly. Have I got that right?
Before I give up the mic, I'd like to make one important point, at least in my opinion it's important, is that all of this trail work and riprap extension was predicated by engineer Norm Hill on getting the silt under control first. He said, if you just build this trail and all this stuff, it's just going to fill up with silt. So he strongly recommends getting the silt under control first. Thanks.
Understood.
Well, just to be clear, are we still on agenda item A, which is our discussions, or have we sort of intermingled that with the lot release issue?
I think we've intermingled it.
We're intermingling.
Okay.
My question
Yes,
was
sir.
specifically on item A here.
Yes, sir. Okay, so to answer your question directly, certainly if there is agreement on the nature and type of modifications that are to be installed, then I don't think anybody assumes we would just do it. There would be some sort of a revision to the plans. Yes, I'm sure we all contemplate that, even though we didn't really discuss it directly.
Because that's kind of been part of the topic of discussion all along is, any potential action by the board on this issue.
So to further, yes, I understand. And to further that, and to answer your other question, with regard to this issue, no, I don't think the board's being asked to take any action this evening. We're essentially reporting to you some aspect of progress. Although I am reminded that in our discussion today, there was at least some mention of how best to accomplish any sort of permitting that's necessary. And Attorney Sawerda mentioned that they are presently before, I believe, the Conservation Commission, so maybe it makes sense to wrap it into that. But that's all sort of very preliminary. On to the lot release issue. I mean, with all respect to Mr. Aberg, I'm not sure what qualification he has to make some of the statements he did about the nature of the work, what's been done, what hasn't been done. I don't think any of us need to be an engineer to know that clearly the amount of water coming out of the detention basin is not going to be anywhere near the force that resembles what's used by a fire truck. That just isn't even really possible. I just would refute what he said about that, and also about the status of construction. So I unfortunately haven't seen the letter that was submitted, and I guess with that, I would ask that, unless there's some reason not to, if ever in the future there is some sort of correspondence, it would be helpful for us to have it, either by the person who delivered it or I respectfully ask the town. But in any event, I did visit the site yesterday, and I do have pictures that were taken quite recently. And I don't know how well this can be displayed on the camera or otherwise. I'm happy to show them to you. But they clearly show that grass and vegetation is, in fact, established in the basin in its entirety, basically, which is consistent with with what Mr. Goldrich reported being his observation and that of Graves Engineering. With regard to the forebay, I'm told this evening by the contractor who built the drainage basin and the site that the discussion with Graves apparently resulted in a conclusion that the gabions that form the forebay, which are really not much more than wire baskets filled with rock, have a tendency to rot, rust, and fail. So apparently there was some sort of a conclusion that in lieu of those, that the riprap that forms an element of the sediment forebay be sort of extended and enlarged and I think deepened. I'm sure he could speak more directly to it. So it was on that basis that the forebay was completed, so I'm told, as it has been. Now, if it so happens that, you know, the either Graves or the board or some other body with authority, the Conservation Commission perhaps, determines that, well, no, that's really not what ought to happen, then it wouldn't be a difficult matter at all to install those gabions forming the forebay. However, the fact that they may not be there at present, I don't think is reason enough for the board to withhold a lot release, especially when the amount of construction that's been done is so substantial. As you heard or maybe have seen if you visited the site, the roadways installed, the utilities are installed, the drainage is installed, almost all of the granite curbing is installed, but for you know, some final coat of pavement, and I don't know if the plans show street trees or that sort of thing. The roadway is, it's got to be at least 70 to 80% complete. And I would think that under normal circumstances, if there wasn't a private party here to you know, wage a complaint, that the board would freely authorize a release of at least 4 of the 7 lots on that basis. So for all those reasons, we would ask the board to, yes, please release the 4 lots that we've requested, especially because you're withholding the number of lots you are. And with that, I'd like to just hand you these photos. Maybe you can pass them around. I don't know if there's a way to display them on the screen, but I'd like you to see them. Thank you.
So, as far as you're aware, do we have any documentation from Graves or any plan revisions that show the gabion as a change?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I don't believe that exists.
If I'm reading the decision correctly, there are 3 conditions that need to be met prior to release of lots. One of them has to do with compliance with Conservation Commission conditions. One of them has to do with executed documents to grant to the town of rights regarding the roadway drainage easements and other infrastructure. And one of them has to do with stormwater management facilities and structures being completed and stormwater runoff suitably controlled to the satisfaction of this board. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I'd also point to the covenant as well that is binding upon the project that typically looks to the infrastructure of the project being completed as well. So if I may, I had not spoken to the lot release yet, so just kind of noting that. So we have the covenant in place. When the original lot release was submitted, it was for all of the lots, and I called the applicant expressing concern about releasing all of the lots, especially with the ongoing drainage issues. It is somewhat typical for boards under a covenant to release a number of lots throughout construction, but similar to reducing a bond during the course of a project. However, you certainly would not want to release all of the lots, as that's essentially the leverage in order to ensure that the project is completed satisfactorily. So in that case, they did reduce the ask for the number of lots to be released. But certainly there's more work to be done in terms of the infrastructure and drainage, as well as the seeding to go on. Just to clarify, it was stated that the grass has been grown as necessary. From our site visit, I haven't been out in the last few weeks, but from our site visit a couple weeks ago, It was noted that the top of the drainage basin does have appropriate grass that is growing, but certainly the rest of the site, as well as the portion of the drainage basin sloping down and collecting the water, the grass in that area has struggled to grow. I believe that the applicant may have hydroseeded since that time, and the condition may have improved. But
Yeah, so with respect to the conditions to be met prior to release of lots, I'm not aware that we have documentation to the effect that those conditions have been met.
What were the conditions again?
Condition E1, evidence shall be provided to the planning board and or its agent indicating compliance with conditions set forth by the Conservation Commission, specifically regarding the operations and management of the rain gardens, etc. E2, documents in a form acceptable to the town that grant to the town all rights regarding roadway drainage easements and all other infrastructure. Condition E3, stormwater management facilities and associated structures, including pipe, loaming, and seeding, shall be completed, and stormwater runoff suitably controlled to the satisfaction of the board prior to the release of any lot within that portion of the subdivision.
So, if I may, I expect that those first two conditions, documentations from the Conservation Commission that conditions have been met, such as the operation of rain gardens, and the second condition, documentation that confirms that the town will have suitable easements over whatever portions of the site are necessary, are the types of conditions that the decision contemplated would not be in place upon the release of, say, the very first lot, or the second or third or fourth. Because after all, before the first lot is released, there hasn't been a rain gutter installed, so the Conservation Commission couldn't give you confirmation that they have it, and an easement is premature. However, those are certainly the sort of conditions that the town is assured will be met by, as Mr. Goldrick mentioned, reserving to yourselves, the last two lots or the last lot. On the other hand, the third condition, which is confirmation that the stormwater management system has been suitably constructed, at least to the point where it's the subdivision is built. I think you have confirmation this evening that that has been met in the words of your town planner and Graves Engineering. So, as I say, I can't imagine that those conditions were contemplated to be met before the release of the very first lot. You agree?
Yeah, it is somewhat, the way these conditions read, it's as these conditions generally would be prerequisite to having all lots released. As Chris noted, we fairly commonly release a subset of the lots from time to time.
Sure.
And kind of obviously until the whole thing's done, some of these conditions are not likely to be met. So how we interpret this in practice is maybe a little bit different than how it reads on paper.
I understand, but I assume you agree with my point that especially the rain gutter is a bit of a chicken and an egg sort of a quandary on our part.
Yeah.
I mean, let's agree that the purpose of the security, whether it's a covenant or a bond or a tripartite agreement, is to assure that the town has some mechanism of guaranteeing that the roadways and the infrastructure are completed. And I think you always have that by reserving at least a couple lots, which will be the case here.
I will just add, at least from my standpoint as well, the retention basin not having the gabion, which is on the plans that we have in front of us, is on the documentation that we have in writing that was peer reviewed. It's on all our formal record. Not being in place, even by your own statement, is a concern when there is concerns about the outflow of that detention basin. Having some documentation on why that's not there, especially if it's also incorporated from our peer reviewers saying that it's not the best plan or whatever. If we have that documentation, it's a little bit more reassuring that, okay, this is up to the design standards we had reviewed when we approved this. Just for me.
I understand. I can put myself in your shoes, and that's not an unreasonable position to be in. However, as I said, it is an element of the detention basin. It doesn't involve, constructing another 30 feet of embankment or enlarging the basin. It's literally bringing in, a dozen gabions and setting them in place. And so I take it then, and I think I'll speak for my client, that we will then get to work on either getting the documentation necessary to confirm that the forebay as constructed satisfies the intent of the plan, or I guess simply do it. I still maintain, though, that the lack of that forebay is still not reason enough. I liken it to, you wouldn't withhold releasing the lots if, say, 10% of the granite curb wasn't constructed and 90% of it was, for example. So on that basis, I would still ask that the board release the lots based on the amount of work that's been done, or at least some lots.
We just pause right here. Natalia, I do realize you've had your hand up for a while. I neglected to call on you. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. My point was just in response to Rob Aberg's. The question was whether there was a recent construction estimate by Graves, and the answer was that the last one was in the spring. It wasn't a building report or any of that. That was a discussion that was held, was whether there was a recent construction estimate report done. And that was done, like I said, I think either March or May in the spring, and it was for the full amount of it was for a bond, which was never received, but it was for the full amount. There was no cost estimate done afterwards.
Thank you.
Yep, just to add to that, so as was noted, back in the spring, the board was contemplating and the applicant was contemplating whether to move ahead with a covenant or a bond. The cost estimate was prepared in preparation for a bond to be put in place. We did then move to a covenant and did not institute a bond for this security.
Bob had his hand
Yeah,
up a
Bob,
moment ago.
go ahead.
Hello?
Did you have on, Bob?
Yeah, I did, but I couldn't quite make out. I'm not hearing you as well as you're hearing me, I think.
Yeah.
I have I guess a few questions, which, let's see. First of all, do they not need any clearance from the building department to go ahead and, or from us to go ahead and dig basements?
That I'm not sure in terms of digging the cellar holes. Certainly, I believe a foundation permit would trigger building action, but that would be a question for the building inspector, and I can certainly reach out to get that answer.
Yeah, that bothers me a little bit. Now, one of those conditions mentions satisfying Concom requirements, right, Dave?
Yes, it was Concom requirements regarding rain gardens and stormwater management. And
Right.
as Attorney Knappich pointed out, the rain gardens aren't likely to be there before the houses are built. But stormwater management, on the other hand, is sort of, Concom's purview and this board's purview as well.
Right. We're talking about stormwater management, and
That seems to be the topic.
I seem to hear that something is before Concom right now. How does that interact with this? Are they going to have any? Is there going to be any change in their requirements?
Well, I would like, well, go ahead.
Do you
I'm
want me to
sorry.
answer that?
Let me get out of your way. The
Go ahead.
question was asked of you.
You can use this mic.
There's
You're
nothing
all set
before
up.
Concom regarding this project.
No, yeah, so just to clarify things, is the ADA complaint that you probably heard first about in 2019, we've moved that through Concom. We separated this topic from that because we're on a November 30th deadline. So our notice of intent was granted on October 21st, when's the Tuesday? 19th? whatever last Tuesday was. We received our notice of intent, and we've moved ahead with a contractor, MSF Landscapes, to install $10,000 worth of ADA compliant gravel pave 2 material at the grade required for ADA compliance. So that wetlands permit, that notice of intent, only covers that one section, and it's no longer before Concom.
But is there anything for this project that is before Concom at this point?
Not with the land trust yet. We want to sort this out and then start a new one.
Right, because I keep hearing something about this project being, having Concom meetings still going on in some way.
Yeah, that's up the trail, Bob, and that one has just completed last week, so it's fresh information.
All right, and we don't necessarily know whether they're satisfied.
They just gave us a wetlands permit to begin construction on the part up by the parking area to comply with the wheelchair complaint.
And we're going to have to be clear that condition has been satisfied, the condition in the decision.
Yeah, that condition E1 would be
Concom
relative
might
to
have to
the,
say,
right, that would be relative to the subdivision project, not the land trust project.
right. I said my piece.
We kind of have multiple
Oh.
topics swimming around here, and it's hard to
Yeah.
keep them straight.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I
It's
may.
very simple. There's a condition and it has to be met. Is it met? Is it not met? If stuff is going on with the Concom with respect to this process that we're in, this project, we need to know whether that condition is satisfied. Not, that was a broader topic than the ADA issue. That's what
Go ahead.
drainage and whatnot.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to try to streamline it, because I've been on that side of the table, sometimes
Thank you.
it gets away from you. I do want to just for the record, I am going to put, just since it's show and tell time with pictures, just so I put in my 2 cents.
Just a reminder, anything handed to me, I have to keep.
Yep. Yep. Just showing the lack
Thank you.
of grass and, second, October 4th for the pictures for the record. With regard to the Gambians, just for clarity purposes, if it's, number one, clearly whatever field change that Graves may have discussed should have come before the board because it's clearly material, because there's material going out the other side of the pipe. Therefore, it's certainly not a minor change. It should have come before the board if you wanted to eliminate that. Secondly, with regard to the Gambian, if it's that easy to get them in and it's that important an issue, which I want to emphasize to the board, my brother counsel did raise issues of, well, you can release it if there's granite curbing and all that. One of the things about that is that's confined to that subdivision. Those are the people who bought the lots in there. It's the builder and it's the town. It doesn't affect the third party. We are a third party off-site being affected by the development. We're in negotiations to try to finish it. And for my purposes, whenever I am advising clients, you keep the most leverage you can in order to make the situation resolve itself. So from the board's perspective, giving up a lot or two seems to me to be counterproductive to trying to get this done, over with, and move on to other business. So I firmly believe, based upon the call we had today, that we can reach some agreement within the next 2 weeks. I assume that's when your next meeting is. They can get the Gambians, it seems, done in the next 2 weeks, based upon council saying it's very easy to do. So it seems to me, by 2 weeks from today, your problems may all go away. And you may have consensus, Gambians in, and able to move forward.
Yeah. My list isn't done yet. This is directly to the last point,
Sorry.
A, but
You want me back up there, Bob? Is that directed to me?
I don't know who's
no,
Bob asking.
he's standing and I'm not sure whether he wants to move on because I haven't finished my list.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bob, then.
How does this famous facility get maintained on an ongoing basis?
Which facility are you speaking of? The drainage basin?
Well, the drainage, mostly the basin, but whatever needs maintaining in this system.
So the drainage infrastructure would be maintained by the applicant or the developer until such time as it's conveyed to the town, at which point DPW would take over the responsibility for maintenance.
Okay. And then my last point is, it says to the satisfaction of the board. We've been asked to go so far or pointed towards the prospect of going so far as to invoke 81W with respect to the subdivision. I need to be really satisfied before, because it's as far as that prospect. So I'm not satisfied at this point with any of it. And I think we need to get closure on even whether our engineer agrees that it's built right or it gets built right. We can't go out there and tell about any of that. So I'm going to want all that evidence. And I really want the land trust to tell us that they're sufficiently satisfied so it's okay to go ahead with release. I don't know how I can be satisfied. I understand the difficulty with that, but the situation is difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Mr. Russo, the contractor, who can speak to siltation issues if the board would like to hear it. I just address a couple of points. I don't know how the board can place in a third party, namely, a private adjoining landowner, this sort of authority and power to tell you whether or not the construction is completed to their satisfaction such that you can release lots. It's a little bit surprising to hear that, if I heard correctly, is what's proposed. Now, I think you've heard some encouraging news this evening regarding the 2 points, and I think we're kind of conflating two issues. I would remind the board that they ought not be. The board is constrained by the subdivision control law, your regulations, and the decision, which basically says that you have the right to security, whether it's a covenant, a bond, or a tripartite agreement, or some combination thereof, and the applicant has the absolute right to vary the form of security over time. And I'm sure the board, in the normal course, hears requests for lot releases all the time. And I'm sure that the board doesn't consider the effects on abutting private landowners. If the board is going to embark on that process, then I suppose anybody who lives next to a subdivision who thinks, well, it's a little more visible than I'd like, so maybe I'd like to have a fence, can in effect hold up the process by insisting that lots not be released. But that's clearly not the purpose of the security that the town has. The purpose is to ensure the completion of the roadways and infrastructure. That's it. It's not to assure that private interests are satisfied. The board should not be acting as that sort of instrumentality. So I would ask the board to please, can remind yourselves or be mindful of what you're constrained by. And if you do that, I think we've shown to this, it should, I believe, have shown to the satisfaction of the board in the testimony of Mr. McGoldrick and the town engineer that yes, the drainage basin and the infrastructure has been installed, if not exactly according to plan. Maybe the gabions aren't there, then certainly substantially according to plan. Such that you should release all lots? No. As was pointed out, that request was withdrawn. Such that you can request or release some lots, I would certainly suggest that that is the case. And again, would renew the request that you do so.
Go ahead, Bob.
Now, I think what I said was that I'm not satisfied at this point. And then I think I said I could be satisfied. One way I could be satisfied is to have an agreement that from the land trust that we're okay to go ahead. If we don't have that, then have to make a decision without it. And that will be a more difficult decision to make positively. And right now, I'm not ready to do it at all.
Well, I would ask the board to vote on,
I think when we could make them, we could have a motion to sign to suspend the plan, the subdivision under 81W. That's, that's as serious as it could get. And I'm going to be hesitant to do anything that would compromise the options until we're in a place where we're satisfied. I may not be the only member who isn't satisfied.
Okay, so I promise to be brief. With all respect to Mr. Hassinger, yes, the notion was made by Attorney Sawerda early on that, maybe you ought to consider something so drastic as to rescind the subdivision. And Mr. Hassinger correctly points out that the board does have that authority under the subdivision control law, but it can't do it without basis. It can't do it arbitrarily or capriciously. It has to be because the project is not constructed in accordance with the plans. And not only have you not heard that from a qualified expert, you've heard the opposite. So I have to respond when the comment is made, well, we could rescind the subdivision. You could, but you would have to have some pretty firm basis for doing so.
You keep saying that Chris told us it was okay. We have the land trust telling us it's not okay. And they have engineering level discussion too. We have an unresolved point there. And part of what I need is for all the engineers to agree on where we are and, was it built? Wasn't it built? Is it adequate? Whatever. I want everybody to be telling us the same thing about the conditions.
Okay. I will say Chris has his hand up. I'll let him go. We also have two people looking to speak who have not yet spoken, so I'm gonna move this along.
So kind of building on those points, but also taking a little bit of a step back. I think what was commented by both parties, and it is clearly the case in this situation, is I think that really for the board to proceed and from this discussion, input from Graves Engineering is really required for the board to move forward. There's questions in terms of the adequacy of the drainage and the drainage system as built. Again, I'm not an engineer and I can't speak to that. I can speak to conversations that I had during a site visit, but certainly can't speak to whether or not that's adequate for the board to consider in terms of lot release. That's something that I think Graves Engineering is more qualified to speak to. Certainly the board can consider release of lots without that information if they saw fit. But given the direction of the conversation tonight, it seems clear to me that would be useful for the board to make a decision and a determination in terms of the lot release request. And certainly in terms of the path forward for the drainage basin as designed and constructed. Further, I think that provides an opportunity for what seems like a timely resolution to come before the board in the next couple of weeks as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bob. Finish your thought.
Okay. Yeah, I want to be sure that there's a disconnect between what Land Trust gave us today and what you got with Graves. whatever, a couple weeks ago, whenever. I want to be sure that when Graves is talking to us and telling us, that they be aware of the other side or the land trust's concerns. Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, I agree, and to that point, neither I nor Graves has an opportunity within one day to have any meaningful consideration of something submitted with just one day.
I'm gonna have you go. I will just caution for one thing on that, where it's, as the engineer, you're looking to speak from my understanding that none of us are engineers, so we.
I'm not
you
an
know-
engineer either.
Oh, I apologize then.
No, I'm not that bright. I don't have the fancy words. I'm Andy Russo. I developed the site for the developer. We did the site work.
Yeah.
Just to run down the list real quick, with conservation, I've had many walks and conversations with Leah. No conservation issues whatsoever with our site. We did have one storm before any hydro seeding was done, where some silt did go just beyond the hay bale on the truss side. We have photographs of it. It was like a 3 foot by 2 foot area. She was out there with me, cleaned it up, removed it, reinstalled silt fence. And that was not, even to this day, silt that goes into that, into the 4-bay area, which I can get a letter from Jeff, you can talk to Jeff. It is, even though you don't see the wire cages, it's still 4 feet thick, larger riprap, covered with a larger area. Jeff and I talked about that personally on the site. They've done countless site visits, had personnel there while we installed all the cans, the pipe, the field, everything. They had emails of reports they did, everything they checked out. And since day one, there was a question about how the outfall, which is the flared end section, is literally on the hay bale line. I mean, it's like the property for the land trust and Brad's property, the developer's property, it dumps out on the hay bale line. That's just by design. That was approved by all the boards across the entire town. And the silt, any silt they saw in that area, that did not even come through the 4-bay or through the project. That was the grass didn't get established on the slopes, and it created voids in the slope, and it washed into the outlet control structure right there. It never came through the 4-bay into the pond, out the outfall. It was when the grass was established, we had some real heavy rains, and it made voids, which we have corrected. The photographs that I saw quickly as they walked by, those were from August 4th. October 4th, sorry, October 4th, October 4th. The photographs we did were from 2 days ago. The grass is night and day different. Anyone that sees it, grass has taken off in the last couple of weeks. It really has. So it is stabilized at this point. And then, not to mention, a lot of water too, and you can see it on a rainfall, comes down Wheeler Road. It used to come right into this project. Now, because the project's developed, it goes right by there, and it goes down the street toward that parking area and comes in that way. That's nothing to do with this project or development. That's just the way the road is.
No, that's not correct.
Well, from my understanding, when we were
Excuse
done.
me, it's not a
we-
discussion between parties.
Okay,
Direct
so,
conversation through the chair.
long story short, if we would even, at this point, we could take the pond that's there. If I plug the holes in the outlet control structure, so just use it as a retention, just to hold the water. Technically, that pond is created in the beginning of construction to catch the sediment on purpose, that you clean it out when construction is done. That way it has somewhere to go. So by doing those first 3 lots, we cannot get foundation permits, but we dug the holes. There's no problem with that, because like you had mentioned, it creates almost another mini area to hold water. But if we could develop those first 3 lots around the corner, even the 4th lot, and got them established and got yards done and then controlled it, it would be a lot less runoff period on that whole side of the site. So the only way to really prevent any more runoff is to start wrapping it up. Granted, the far side of the street's not gonna benefit because the curb will block it, but the lots near that pond, releasing those and getting them finished will slow down a lot of the problems anyone's seeing. Because it will have grass, will have establishment, and it will take things up.
Thank you.
Yes, excuse me, Chris Lemay, 41 Keith Hill Road. I am a board member of the Grafton Land Trust also. I was kind of shocked when I heard the lot release was on here tonight, because the last time we had a meeting, we were talking about 81W, as Bob brought up, and all of a sudden we're now talking about lot release. I called this morning, there's been no inspection report filed. So I guess how would you determine to release lots without a detailed site inspection from Graves on record? The last recorded inspection was done in March or May. So I don't know how this even got on here without the proper paperwork in place when we have an ongoing issue. We have an ongoing issue now of the water coming onto our property. And it's been brought up that this basin isn't working somehow, there's a problem, and then the change is made, but it's not brought to the board. I don't understand how that's not considered somewhat substantial when there's an issue. If there wasn't an issue and the system was working, I'd say, okay, maybe we can get away with it, but it's clearly something's wrong. So just go and do that and say, oh, it's all right. I really don't know how we got to that point. You know, we're a nonprofit. Every time we come to the meeting, Mike's a heck of a nice guy, but he's not here for free. And this just keeps on getting kicked down the road, the can. Why wasn't Graves out there when this first came up? Why weren't they sent out there? This is an issue. They're in town all the time. Why not, hey, I don't know, is it still Jeff Hall? I don't even know. Is he still Jeff? Whatever. So why wasn't, hey, can you go by, still want to check it out? There's a problem. So when is it, this is going on for weeks, months. We're not getting anywhere with this thing. We're getting closer. Mike and Attorney Knappich are working. We're getting there, but still, it just keeps on getting, it's like push us to the back burner. This is a serious issue for us. That trail is one of the most popular trails in this town.
Yeah.
We got a freezing session coming up. It's going to be raining, freezing. If that water's coming onto that trail, is that even usable? So I would ask that we get a permit from Graves, and do they do any like elevations of that basin to make sure that those elevations are properly constructed so we know that it's working? Is that a problem? Is it not constructed to the right elevation? Is the outflow at the right elevation? Is that something that we're going to know so we can rectify the situation? I mean, it's clearly you see there's a problem there.
I totally understand. I think we're gonna want. No, I'll let Chris speak.
Yeah, so I'll touch on a couple things. So, how this item got on the agenda tonight, as a fellow board member, I'm sure would understand that it's something submitted to the board. We do take it up, and we are currently reviewing the options for a potential for a lot release. The board has taken no action, but when it's requested, it comes before the board. So that's how we got here tonight. Obviously, there have been things brought up, concerns that I think some were anticipated, some potentially not anticipated prior to tonight. So certainly that's something that the board will have to weigh in terms of the discussion that's been had. Speaking to the inspections that have been done by Graves, so as I noted earlier, I have done several site visits by myself, as well as in coordination with Graves to go view the site. Certainly when the issue was brought up, it was first sent to the board, and then also sent over to Graves to make them aware of the issues and the concerns that were expressed by the Grafton Land Trust in terms of the drainage. So my understanding is that they are well aware of the concerns and the issues and have been monitoring the site as they normally do. In terms of inspections, they do inspect all the infrastructure as it's put in place. But certainly the most thorough inspection is going to be in relation to the as-built plans. I think what needs to be understood is that construction sites go through a lot of changes during construction. We're working on the site as we go, and I think that's something that the board has to review if the construction is progressing in a way that is satisfactory to them for what is being requested in terms of the release of leverage, specifically in terms of the lot release. Again, from my site visit, I did not note significant issues from my perspective in terms of specifically how the progress of the project has gone to date. Graves did not express that to me. But again, in light of the discussion tonight and the concerns that were brought up, I certainly think that that's something that could be revisited with Graves and reviewed in more detail, and that may provide the board with additional information to proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. I think going back to Chris's earlier suggestion, and you sort of reiterated that at this point in the discussion, it would seem to be most appropriate for the board to get a report from Graves up to date as to basically how how well the what is the stormwater management system designed and constructed to the point where should be expected to be constructed at this stage of the development. I mean, there may be more work to do, but I mean, a lot of this is, the type of thing that would be in place, relatively early, the stormwater management system being part of the utilities and all that stuff. So if Graves were to report to this board that as of today or some point in time after today, whenever Graves can do the inspection and whatever analysis or whatever else they need to do, if at the board's next meeting we receive we see a report from Graves that says, in their judgment, in their engineering judgment, their professional judgment, everything was built according to the plan, or with minor changes that would be of the type that might normally be expected, but substantially according to plan, and such that the stormwater management system works at least as well as it is expected to work. I think that would go a long way towards satisfying the board for again, as a reminder, it's a partial lot release. And Graves could even, the applicant's attorney has suggested that the development of these lots might actually help in the stormwater management. Graves could offer an opinion on that, but I think more importantly is the stormwater management system designed, built, and working at least as well as it should be expected to be at this point.
I'd hope that we'd be sure, I think I sort of said it before, that Graves respond to the points that were raised in the letter from the land trust. In other words, yes, that's true, or no, it actually is this way, not that way, or whatever it takes, so that we have one consistent view.
Now, I will just articulate for the board's knowledge and anyone in the public that the board's next meeting is in 3 weeks, unlike the usual 2. It'll be November 14th.
Yep.
I believe that's what I got.
3 weeks ought to be plenty of time for the two parties involved to wrap up their discussions.
It may
ought to be plenty of time for Graves to conduct a reasonably thorough review.
And that review, thank you for bringing us back to that, because that goes to the point number 3 of the conditions you mentioned. But I don't think it's unreasonable for us to ask about, expectations, so there can be some certainty. So to return quickly to conditions 1 and 2, just so we don't have the same discussion 3 weeks hence, I'm going to assume that the points I mentioned about rain guards and such hold true, and that the board, unless you tell me otherwise, will not require something from the Conservation Commission. Or perhaps we do ask the commission for a letter saying what the contractor said, which is essentially no issues.
Right.
In satisfaction of that condition.
Right, and this is sort of the point I mentioned earlier. It's not really the decision and the conditions as written they're not written to contemplate a partial lot release. And we've done, it's not uncommon for us to release, some of the lots in a subdivision
I would assume
as the
so.
development progresses. So, I think we need, I think we all need to be clear on that conditions that can only be reasonably expected to be met upon completion of construction are not something that we need to take into account. On the other hand, as you suggest, if conservation can tell us that at this point everything's good as far as they're concerned, it's not final yet because there's a lot of stuff still to be done, but everything that's been done to this point is satisfactory to conservation. That it wouldn't hurt for us to get that.
Okay, then I won't belabor the point, and I'll assume that the conditions relating to easements can be dealt with further down the road, and rain gutters and that sort of thing. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
That, I mean, ultimately handing it all over to the town doesn't happen until the subdivision is complete.
I understand, right. But what I'm trying to avoid is 3 weeks hence being ready to get a lot release and then have somebody say, well, what about those easements? Well, clearly, as you suggested, that's a condition that is, expected to be satisfied down the road. Fair enough?
I think that's a fair summary of what the board's thinking.
Okay,
tonight.
all right.
Anybody on the board disagree with that? I mean,
Well,
yeah, when you look at it from this angle, you realize that maybe the conditions could have been written a little differently, anticipating partial lot releases and all that.
Hindsight's a beautiful thing.
Yes, hindsight is always, I don't know, my hindsight isn't always 20/20, but
So in the interest of wrapping these two agenda items up, is there any action the board wishes to take tonight to further this in any way?
it doesn't sound like it to me. I think we've got, there's some things, some things in motion here. Some, various people have got some homework to do, but yeah, no, it doesn't seem like any action by the board at this point is appropriate.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
input.
And yeah, just make a note, Chris, for the next meeting to make sure this is on the agenda as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Those agenda items took a little bit longer than I anticipated. That brings us to our overdue public hearings. The first, I'll give a few seconds for the room to clear out.
Let me see here. Yes. Gotta skip right down to our public hearing.
Okay. Our first public hearing on the agenda is a new public hearing for special permit and site plan approval at 40 Main Street, 4027 Main Street, LLP.
All right, we'll begin with the reading of the legal notice pursuant to sections 1.3.3, 1.5.7, and 12 of the Town of Grafton zoning bylaws. The planning board will hold a public hearing on Monday, October 24th, 2022, commencing at 7:30 p.m. in Conference Room A at the Grafton Memorial Municipal Center, 30 Providence Road, to consider a special permit application and site plan approval for a multifamily building with 3 dwelling units and associated parking facilities on property located at 40 Main Street, Grafton Assessor's Map 115, Lot 47. Said property is located in a village mixed-use district. The applicant/owner is 4027 Main Street, LLC. Copy of the application/plan is available for public inspection at the planning department during regular business hours or on the Town of Grafton website at www.grafton-ma.gov on the planning department/development projects webpage. There we go.
Now, I'll have you go, but if I'm remembering correctly, this is largely the same, essentially, proposal that we previously discussed as a board.
Yep, so I'll give a brief introduction. So this application is actually identical to what the board has reviewed previously. So this special permit at 40 Main Street is looking to, under the village mixed use, add a multifamily building with 3 dwelling units and associated parking facilities. The project was previously approved by the board, and as the board I'm sure is aware, typically carries a condition that the project be substantially started or constructed within a certain time frame. In this case, it was 1 year. That time frame has at this point lapsed, and so when contacted by the applicant, noting that it had lapsed, we looked at the process to move forward and reinstate the application and approval. So the recommendation was to submit a new application using a lot of the same materials that could be reused, and updating obviously the minutia that goes along with an application, such as the certificate of good standing, a butters list, etc. So that has taken place, but this application is largely the same application that the board has reviewed and approved previously. One of the questions for the board tonight would be a waiver of peer review. In this case, there have been no substantial changes. It was, peer reviewed last year, so it is fairly recent. And my recommendation, respectfully, would be that I think that would be in order, but obviously defer to the board in that determination.
So I do notice we do have Mr. Belak on the attendees that can be brought into the meeting.
Oh, yep. Sorry.
And I see someone named Patrick, which I'm going to guess is Patrick Duffy, but I don't know if that would be accurate.
Yeah, I'll let
Wayne's
Wayne's entering. I'll let him know if that is indeed the.
And just one question I would like answered for the record is for myself is just a brief summary on why this was a delay over the year and not filed with the clerk, with the Worcester County deeds.
Yeah. And was there any consideration given to asking for a modification of the plan that of the approval that has now passed, rather than trying to do it again? Might have been.
Yeah, so in terms of the direction between a modification of the currently approved plan and a new application, I believe that was responsive to my recommendation that it be a full new application, as the previous had expired.
Yeah. Okay.
Good evening, Wayne. How you doing?
Chairman, members of the board, how is everybody?
Believe it
Great seeing you folks. Great seeing you folks again. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So joining us tonight as well as Patrick Duffy is from 4027 Main Street LLC. So if you wouldn't mind folks inviting him as a panelist. He has, so I know there are a couple questions. I heard Mr. Hassinger raise the questions. And first of all, again, I think you know my sentiments about working in the town of Grafton. I really appreciate everything you guys do. This project was a real good project through the permitting process, both with your board and the Conservation Commission. So with that said, we did, if I could, Mr. Chairman, just kind of give you guys an update as to what, so as you know, we did receive the permits. This one here, the site plan approval and special permit. We also received an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission and a wetland bylaw permit. Those permits expire, we'll make sure that doesn't happen, in February of 2024. When this whole thing came about and the client had informed me of his situation, so basically we got the permit, as you know, last year. As Mr. McGoldrick stated, there were no changes to the filing whatsoever. Everything that had come before you folks before still stands. And so Mr. Duffy last year, when we started this process, had yet to secure a contractor. He had done some shopping, and again, as he was going through that process, met with the building inspector and then found out that he needed to do a fire prevention system or suppression system in the building because it was 3 units. And so in doing that, he hired a fire suppression engineer who was a little slower in response. And for those of you who work in the industry, in the land development or building industry, I think you can appreciate how slow things are right now in trying to get things done because there's such a demand from everybody. And so that's what he had run into. And then once he got through that, he got to his, the bank financing, that all came into place. And he had asked me, so how much time do I have on the life of this permit? I said, well, they're typically 2 years. Let me take a look. And when I looked, it was a 1-year permit. So Patrick had indicated to me that he thought that was the case as well, and saw that it had expired. So basically what we're looking for, respectfully requesting of this board, is that the board consider the reaffirmation of the board's vote last year on the waivers. And I'd be happy to go through a brief presentation of the plan if you guys would like as well. Like I said, same plan from last year. We did receive the waivers from last year. We are seeking an additional waiver to that, and that would be for peer review, saying that Graves Engineering had reviewed it last year. So with that said, I'd like to open it up to the board and get your thoughts and your wishes.
All right.
I will note that, indeed, if this application is identical to the previous one, the applicable zoning bylaws have not changed. You know, had the zoning bylaw changed in a way that affected this, and it would be reviewed under the newer zoning bylaws, but that's not the case. It's the zoning bylaws that govern this are the same as they were 2 years ago. The design, the project design, everything is the same as it was 2 years ago. The board approved it unanimously 2 years ago with a set of waivers, whatever we approved. And off the top of my head, I don't see any reason why we couldn't, basically just reaffirm our approval from 2 years ago, with the addition, as noted, of not requiring a new peer review.
Bob, go ahead.
Can we establish that essentially nothing has changed? Chris, you mentioned updating some things, but if literally nothing has changed and we don't have anybody raising concerns tonight, then figure out the shortest way to say okay.
Yeah, so just to touch base on largely the only changes to the application, I think I described as the minutia, was just the procedural documents in terms of applying to the board. The plans as they were presented to the board and the design has not changed from what was reviewed last year.
Okay.
For 2 years.
If I could, through the chair. So with this having happened, and not knowing at the time I had the discussion with the applicant, that we were looking at the permit having had expired, he has moved ahead and they've ordered the units, their modular units, to be thrown together and delivered at the beginning of I think the first week in December. So with that, that's not a problem for the board. That's just where he is. I just wanted to give reassurance that we won't be doing this again. As much as we enjoy seeing you folks, we won't be doing this again with you. Because at that point, he will have already had his work done. So he's, like I said, ideally what he'd like to do is, if the board would so kindly, render a decision, we ask this respectfully, that positions him to be able to have those deliverables in early December mounted to the foundation. So I just kind of wanted to put in perspective that this will not be happening again. This will not, right, Patrick?
All right.
He's a nervous wreck.
Is there anybody there to comment on this? Or
No one
on Zoom?
to be in person. Does not look like anyone's raising their hand on Zoom.
All right.
I will note that there is a draft decision for the board to consider, should the board choose to close the hearing tonight and deliberate on a draft decision.
I move we close the hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously.
Can we
And
do we have to do any walking through the details of the draft decision, or can I just move we approve?
I defer to the board on that. It's largely the same decision as was previously rendered. I did add in narrative to the effect of the previous decision expiring and this being the same.
And so the highlighted items on the draft decision are basically what's different from the previous decision. Dates,
Or the votes, yeah, correct.
dates and all the votes have to be filled in, but,
I will, since it's a special permit, if we move to do the decision tonight, I'll invoke Maura McCormack as associate member to vote on the special permit.
Thank you.
Well, we have 4, but still.
I think that's possible. Yes.
What
I was distracted by somebody. Where are we?
There is no motion on the table. I did just mention that if we are moving to do the decision tonight, I am invoking Maura McCormack as the associate member on the special.
Okay.
Get to vote.
So does anyone on the board want to make it a motion?
I will move that the board grant the decision, basically, with all the findings as drafted, granting the requested waivers, and approving and granting the special permit and site plan approval with all the conditions as drafted.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the decision. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. McCormack.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. We'll get that decision out to...
The decision will reflect the participation of the associate member.
Yes.
Correct.
Of course. Her name has it.
Chairman, members of the board, and I want to congratulate Maura for her first vote.
Second.
So I'm just happy that we could be part of that. I know, all my years serving my community, there's nothing like when you get on the board and you do your first vote on a project. And so, again, like I said, I really do appreciate, working with you folks. You know that.
Yes.
And looking forward to doing some more work in town with you soon. So, thank you very much, folks. You have a wonderful evening. Much appreciated.
Best of luck getting that project completed.
Oh, it'll happen, Mr. Chairman. It'll happen. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Take care.
Thank you. All right, our next agenda item is a continuation of a public hearing for 16 Morgan Drive, Jean Marie Houghton. Chris, anything you want to lead us into, or? Okay.
Yeah, we received updated materials for tonight, and I believe the applicant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So at the last meeting, I was asked to sit down with Mr. and Mrs. Adcock and see if we could come up with a different location for the coop, which fell within the appropriate setbacks, but which gave them more buffer for sound. And he pointed out several areas in the yard that he felt were a reasonable choice. And I'm happy to say that we have relocated the coop to an area that is up against our house, directly under my daughter's bedroom window, so we are very certain what noises they're making. And it places the pool house in line between the coop and their residence, as well as a very large backdrop of trees. And we've also included the backdrop of trees against the property line that we spoke about last time.
And I do see that we did get the certified plan that we were looking for.
And I have the full-size copy here today to give you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll grab that when we're all set. Any comments from the board at this point?
Well, we have a letter, don't we?
We do. And I believe Mr. and Mrs. Adcock are in the room as well.
Okay. Because I'm not sure that, where I'm coming from, when we give these animals under 5 acres, it's rarely down to as little as 1 acre. And it's typically something like horses. the board members know how much issue we found with granting waivers or exceptions to rules in one case, and then having people forever coming in saying, you did it there, I'm entitled to get it too. Why can't I have it? So my concern is going to be, in particular, I'm going to have a concern about how we could write a decision that adequately deals with that issue. I don't want everybody who has animals to come in and say, but you've already given one for 1 acre where an abutter objected, particularly where an abutter objected. If the abutter were agreeable, then that might give a little bit more opportunity to write a decision that would meet that issue. That makes sense?
Does to me.
I think Chris's head is going up and down.
It does to me. Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm really concerned about how we could do this. I don't want to say no, but it's a problem.
Yeah, so I guess to that point, certainly I think the board, and I imagine the board is aware, in terms of weighing the concerns that are brought up, I think that's going to be the crux of this application and where the board lands on it. Certainly we want to take all of the concerns into account in terms of weighing the special permit criteria that are what the board considers for rendering their decision. Some of the concerns brought up are probably more pertinent than others in terms of those criteria and in terms of rendering that decision. What I'd respectfully suggest is that in terms of writing a decision, certainly we could add in specifically any discussion on each of those concerns that the board has and explicitly put in the board's deliberation on each of those concerns and what those that would, in the finding section, I think would be very appropriate to include in the decision. In addition, it is something that is kind of an unwritten rule in land use, but I think again could be explicitly stated in the decision as a belt and suspenders approach that each special permit does stand on its own and is a factor of its own circumstances. As Mr. Hassinger noted, I think the board should be cognizant, especially having abutter concerns in this case, and that if it was a letter of support, it does change future proposals, because you certainly will see people use that as we've seen in other instances, even in recent memory of applicants using other examples to try and sway the board. But ultimately, each application does stand on its own, and I think that is something that can be expressly stated, regardless of where the vote of the board lands, to note that is something that in the future, this is not necessarily an example of any other approval, or should have any weight on any other approval future for the board.
My concern is, as we all know, that's where we stand on another case right now, but the judge doesn't.
Yep.
So that's what makes me very concerned.
This is a serious matter for us.
Yeah, this is more serious than just the specific here. Okay.
probably mentioned this in our previous hearing, but in terms of of possible conditions, should the board choose to approve this, it has been our typical practice in approving similar situations. As Bob mentioned, in the past, it's mostly been horses on less than 5 acres. But we typically include conditions requiring the applicant to use best practices in the management, according to my notes here, which is it's sort of a paraphrase, best practices in the management of the animals, management of manure, or equivalent in this case. I don't think we call it manure when it comes from geese, but management of manure or waste more generally, odors, noise, and potential impacts on abutting properties. So that, that again, if we choose to approve, that would be likely a condition that the board would include, which is probably for most people who are engaged in taking care of animals beyond dogs and cats. It's likely practices that they would choose anyway.
Mm-hmm. So we relocated the coop from the previous area to a property directly behind my house and in line with the pool house. And in doing so, the geese no longer have a view of the street, so they are no longer bothered by school buses. I know that sounds silly, but that was one of their triggers. So they have become exquisitely quiet. They do have, normal noises during the day. They do not make noises after the sun goes down, and they are quiet until, like normal dog barking or sounds of a lawnmower is about the extent of what they're doing right now.
Curiosity question: do they typically make their noises before sunrise?
No.
I know that can still be very early for some, but
Yeah, no, they're very quiet when it's dark out. I think it's a protective mechanism for them. But they would yell at the school bus, and that comes sometimes pretty early in the morning, but they can no longer see the street.
Yes, and as noted, we have a letter on record expressing the concerns of the abutters in this case, or one particular set of abutters.
And I don't know if you're looking at your house from the street, a butter to the left, if you're looking at your house from the street.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that would benefit me, I don't know if the hearing stays open, one thing that would benefit me, just to say it out loud, is a letter from that abutter, if they were willing to provide it, either for, or against the geese, because from where I'm looking at it, it seems like their house is actually closer and more in line with where the geese is now compared to the Adcocks.
Their house to the left of our house is set back on the property line, so they're actually in line with the pool house in the back.
Okay.
So they're set way far back. The distance between the coop and that particular house is 144 feet.
Okay.
And then the other side of us is 184 feet, but through the house itself.
Anything further from the board?
We're heading towards closing the hearing. We don't have more input.
I did not explicitly ask the audience if anyone wants to speak to this ideally in a manner that's not already on our record, because we'll take everything into consideration. Come on up.
The reason I ask is if the hearing were going to stay open, say another time, I'd ask whether maybe we need or might benefit from a field visit to look the situation over and get an actual sense of it. I suspect maybe that's not going to be really necessary or
Yeah, I might suggest
necessary enough.
Right. If there is a possibility of taking additional input, the board could direct staff to begin drafting a decision. Our next meeting is 3 weeks from tonight. We've frequently done this in the past. We've left the hearing open while a decision is being developed so that additional information can be received. With a draft decision in hand on the 14th of November, we could deal with any additional information that came into our attention. we could close the hearing and vote on on a draft decision at that point. So there's really almost nothing to be lost by keeping, in terms of timing, there's nothing to be lost by keeping the hearing open. Should there be an interest in, or should there be additional information that may come in on this topic?
Yep. And just as a, to be completely clear, as a point of just procedure, the decision would be written whether or not the board is looking to approve or deny. You know, we have to have the documents in writing to make our choice on that.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I won't take up a lot of time because I don't think there's much more that can be said on our part than is already in our letter. But I did want to play for you a recording that was taken about a week ago in my bedroom while I was trying to nap. The geese had been relocated. I was unaware. I wasn't aware that they'd been moved because there's been no change. But this is what and this might help Ms. Houghton understand too our concerns better, and the disruption to our own.
May I just ask
Sure.
that after this meeting at some point, can you try to get a copy of that
Absolutely.
over to staff so we have it as part of our record? I know we don't typically put videos on our
Of the
record, but
Respectfully, I think if it's being played in the meeting, and it'll be recorded on the audio equipment, that would be sufficient to be included
Okay.
in the record.
or I can provide a thumb drive if you need one. But this was when I was trying to nap in my bedroom. I've been sick for the past month off and on. And the only thing I do want to add is that we really are in an uncomfortable position. We don't want to upset our neighbors. We don't want to take away their pets. But when you hear this, I think everyone will understand a little better what we deal with.
And this was recorded where?
A week ago,
No, where?
in my bedroom, laying on my bed. I put this on the windowsill. And this does occur during the evenings, and it does occur early in the morning. It's not on a schedule. It's just always unpredictable when you'll hear this kind of, and you see how long it goes on? This goes on for over a minute. And then it could stop, and then it could start up again. But this is what we've been living with for a year.
It is random. It is bothersome. And it is at night and in the mornings. We have heard it. We still hear it, even though they've made an attempt to relocate the geese. But we don't feel that I made this gesture or suggestion or semi-agreement that this could possibly be a fixed location. But I did preface that with the fact that it may be all for naught. She's got 6 trees, which she says she's planted, but they haven't put up any trees yet, which I can almost understand. I wouldn't want to go to that expense either if something wasn't definite in terms of your decision. Moving the geese doesn't seem to have made a difference.
And I don't think that the trees over here will make a difference with the geese here, because as I stated in my letter, we now hear them in the dining room. So when we're entertaining or having people over, as I described, it's very bothersome, and it's noticeable. I mean, it's only going to get worse. All the natural buffers are coming down. I mean, and then when I read the geese can live as long as 20 to 30 years, it's like, oh geez, I don't know if I can do this for 20 years. But like I said, we are not in a very comfortable position. This is not, we don't want to be here. We don't want to be making complaints. But it's been very, very difficult trying to live and sleep. And as I mentioned before, I have a chronic illness. Sleep is something I need. A lack of sleep exacerbates my physical issues. And I just find the whole thing unfortunate. I really do. But I just want the board to understand where we're, I think you do, where we're coming from and what we've had to deal with on a daily basis. Well, it might not even be every day. There are days when it's like, oh, I didn't hear the geese today. And then the next day,
I know you mentioned it was basically at random times of the day, but just for my own curiosity, what time of day was that recording done?
that was about 2 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, on the, on that, it might be helpful, at least for us that weren't there, if that could be made available to us. I can listen here. You know, Linda can.
Is it possible to email? I'm sorry.
If you're able to provide it on a thumb drive, that would be the best.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
I guess I'm some geese.
Anything more we want to address tonight on this, or questions, new comments, anything?
Bang, 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 bang.
What comes up?
Yes, from the others.
I don't have anything else at the moment.
I don't either. Alright,
So is it that we are on pause until the next meeting? Is that what it is?
yeah, formally speaking, I think Ms. Houghton's going to have to request a continuance of the public hearing till the next meeting, similar to what we did last time. In the meantime, we'll also ask staff to draft a decision for us, so that way there we can hear any further, inputs from Ms. Houghton or yourselves or anyone else for that matter on this, thing in for our record, and then at our next meeting, presumably we close the public hearing, then we take a vote on our draft decision with deliberation and along those lines.
Yeah, it is a slight complication for staff to draft a decision not knowing whether the board will ultimately be approving or disapproving the permit. But in this case, I mean, typically the difficulty in that is a potentially lengthy set of conditions that would only make sense if we were granting an approval. In this case here, I think the condition part of the decision is going to be, if it were to be an approval, it would be relatively straightforward. So I think probably the bulk of the decision can be drafted such that it's pretty much the same whether the board votes to approve or disapprove. I don't want to put too much of an extra burden on staff here, but in this case, I think it's probably going to be reasonable, particularly since, who knows? It's 3 weeks, plenty of time to get that done.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
When you do listen to the audio, you'll hear in the beginning, you'll hear voices. So that's a TV in the background. So, but at least I thought, well, at least that helps establish that I was in the house. And
Yep.
Anyway, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So the geese are quiet when the sun goes down, and they do not vocalize until well into the morning hours. I think normal daytime noise, such as lawnmowers, weed whackers, construction equipment, is all going to be heard during the day. And I don't think that this raises above the level of a dog barking or children playing in the backyard or any other natural noises. These are not noises that are occurring after hours would you expect to be quiet time.
Thank you.
Right. So, on the assumption that you will request a continuation.
Yes, please.
To the next meeting, I will vote that the board grant your written request to be received to continue this hearing to Monday,
Maybe you
November
want to
14th.
move.
Yeah, I
Maybe
take
you wanna
that as
move.
that he made the motion to have the board continue. So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue this hearing until November 14th at 7:30 p.m. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger,
Aye. Aye.
and I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. We'll get that in an email to Chris in some way, that the continuation request
We did last time.
or form.
Yeah, I don't have the form with me, but are you able to stop by tomorrow in the office?
No, I wouldn't be able to.
It an email to staff too could just be, that you're requesting a continuance of.
I'll have Natalia email you the form.
Perfect, thank you
That'll
so
work.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
We'll
you.
bring this back up in 3 weeks.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, that brings us back to our action item 2B. Recommendation to select board portion of land at 48 Meadowbrook Road, notice of intent to sell of a 61A withdrawal.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman, if I may, can we take an item out of order? I know we have, CMRPC staff, tonight, and I just wanna be conscious of their time.
Sure, we can certainly do that. Is that 3A, Chris, or 3B?
3B, please.
Okay. So that will be master plan update from CMRPC.
Hi, good evening, everybody. It's nice to see you.
I see you.
Thanks for having me. If I may, so I'm Dominique from CMRPC. For those watching from home from the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, we've been working with the town for the last few months on phase 1 of a master plan update. So I'm here tonight to give a brief presentation and discussion of initial findings. So as the board will recall, phase 1 was simply data collection, analysis, and mapping. So we've provided the majority of those deliverables so far in draft form, subject to your feedback and input. So we submitted a set of maps electronically, as well as a data a presentation that summarizes the majority of the data and visualizations. So we are also polishing up an Excel data file that is manipulable and contains additional data and visualizations that were important and, in many cases informed the visualizations or takes a deeper dive, but we did not include because we didn't think that they were germane to a presentation of that type. So the type of thing that might not end up in a master plan, but you still want to have the numbers to go back and look at. So I hope you've had a chance to take a peek at least at the slide deck and the maps.
I have.
Yes.
What are your initial thoughts?
Well, where to begin? I noticed quite a number of minor points, things that, ranging from typographical errors or apparent typographical errors, such as 2% of people with no vehicles driving to work. I'm sure I strongly suspect that was a typo. And I'm not going to, I don't think it would be a good use of our time tonight to run through a lot of those sort of nagging little details, things that you probably catch in your own proofreading, things like the wrong title on a slide. And some out-of-date data on some maps. I will mention that that the open space data from MassGIS is not up to date. I did, I spent a lot of time 2 years ago with our open space and recreation plan, thoroughly reviewing and getting an up-to-date inventory of all of our open space. As part of that, I noticed that the MassGIS data was out of date. It's been on my back burner now for a couple of years to work through the staff in town to get that data updated. It just hasn't happened yet. In terms of mapping of open space, for the purposes of the master plan, it's probably not critical to have the map that's 100% up to date. I think there's a level of detail that, yeah, it's not perfect, but it's good enough for master plan purposes. As much as I love to pay attention to a lot of detail, I'm trying to remind myself that there's a certain level of detail of things that might not be quite the way I think they should be, that I want to kind of let go, at least for now. Trying to think more of the some of the bigger pictures. And overall, sort of one of the major points I want to touch on, and at least from my review of this so far, is trying to make sure that I think ultimately we want to make sure that the data we present here, both in narrative and graphical and map form, is data that will inform what we want to accomplish with the master plan. In particular, the whole point of doing this master plan, I think, is to to develop a way forward for this town. So a lot of the data here depicts things as they are today or at a specific point in time. There is some data that it's worthwhile further developing a more of a historical point of view. There's a population graph, how Grafton's population has grown over time. You can kind of match that up with another graph showing how the housing in town has grown over time, and it's interesting to see how those two graphs change. There's other information that I had developed sort of internally that goes into more depth depicting how our housing development has changed over time. How different forms of housing have grown or not grown. I think it sort of gives you a big picture, and this is something that ultimately needs to come through in this master plan. Is that for the last 20 years or so in particular, our housing development has been almost entirely single-family detached homes. And ultimately, where I want to go with that is I want people to see this is the path we've been on for housing development. The question for the town is, do we want to continue on that same path, or do we want to change? So it's interesting, and one thing I want to think about, and I haven't come up with all the possibilities here, and I'm not sure that I would ever think of everything in this regard, but I think it's valuable to see not just where things are today, but how certain things have changed over time. Housing is something that I've been paying a lot of attention to for quite some time. I've spent some time today trying to think of, well, what else would be useful to view from more of a historical perspective to see what the trends are. And the only thing I've come up with so far is to look at student enrollment in schools, because I think there's an interesting story there, particularly if you look over, say, the last 20 or 30 years of how school enrollment has changed. And you can look now today, and while we continue to develop housing and our population continues to grow, our student population has been pretty stable for quite some years. It hasn't gone up, it's been fluctuating a little bit, but I think that's an interesting picture to show. More generally, speaking of schools, there's probably more that we can incorporate into this. And I'm assuming that what you've presented to us here is still a work in progress. That we're still gathering more data. So I'm trying to keep that in perspective too. That there's more to come here. There's more that we can develop. But I think we can pay more attention to schools here in a couple of contexts with relative to the master plan. And there may be other topics in which it would be useful to see how things have evolved in Grafton over time, as well as seeing the snapshot of where we are right now. So that's sort of a kind of a broad brush of the things that stuck to my mind that I thought it was worth talking about tonight. As I said, I've got a lot of other details that I might want to communicate to you, but probably not tonight.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Yes. So it is a work in progress, not only in terms of the data collection, what this represents is to date, all of the publicly available secondary data that we were able to get. As you all know, that is far from all of the data that needs to be collected. So, however, some of that is collected in, the course of stakeholder interviews, so qualitative data, public input data, and, the community surveys identify a whole bunch of issues and opportunities. So, absolutely. So as we look at this data, I think it's important to keep in mind that conclusions and recommendations that we'll be coming up with, they're not just based on the one data point, they need to be triangulated, right? So you've got the various types of data, some of which have been collected. We've got the community input, we've got best practices in Massachusetts general law, and in the middle, we will have, some more deeper information. But Yeah, so the housing trends definitely, I think those are, I agree with you, definitely need to be extrapolated more. The schools, we can take a deeper dive there.
One
And
thing that-
I'd look forward to any, any laundry list. So certainly I did catch the typographical details in preparing for this meeting tonight. So I'm sorry about those, but we'll get them in the next round for sure.
One thing that I do think might be interesting, it may not be interesting at all, and it may not be worth putting in, but we have the Chapter 90 funding slide, which is a raw dollar value with compared to us and other surrounding communities. Would that be reasonable to correlate to percentage of the town's budget to a percentage of a dollars per resident of the town, a dollars per acre in town, or things along those those lines, or percentage of like how they compare to the neighboring towns in those areas? I don't know that ends up coming out with being interesting data or not, but that was a thought that came to mind as I scroll those, because we got the over 4 million of Chapter 90 for Worcester, and then 500,000 for Grafton. If you're just looking at that slide alone, it's like, okay, well, they get a lot more, but you don't really have the clear picture on why. Unless
We
you
can
really know
definitely do the cross analysis and take it a step further for sure on all of it.
Go ahead, Bob.
I had a couple of thoughts. At one point, you're talking about a study, or I'm not quite sure exactly what, but doing the build out stuff. And you're talking about 4 different, I think it was 4 different scenarios or points of view about it. I don't know if I'm particularly concerned about 40B.
Okay.
And because that is wide open, and when we're looking at, even if we don't change anything, with don't just analyze on the current zoning, but you have to say how much could happen if 40B really took over the scene. And it seems to be getting a fair number of comprehensive permit approaches. Let's see. I kept on a lot of the charts. I was looking for, okay, now let's see, when was the override? Because, the overrides and the new schools, and I don't know whether there are any, I don't think we've closed any schools over this. It's been a long time since we closed the school. Actually, since we opened the, what's now the, what is it, middle school? And let's see, events. Yeah. Those were the things that just quickly hit me. But I think a fair number of people can relate to the overrides. We've had a variety of overrides, including 2 actual overrides. But building the schools, one thing or another. And some of that might be helpful. I'm sure as we go along that there will be more information. I have to say that the files that I've been able to see in the last day or so have been wonderful. They show up good on my screen, which is marvelous. I think I finally figured out that the maps that were in the text I wanted to look into, and I couldn't get into them. But now I've got the file open, that's the maps, and I think I'm going to be able to blow them up. And they're going to be good when I do that, because they're real PDFs, aren't they?
Yeah, I will. Another observation is just there's a lot of stuff here. There's some data here that I wouldn't have thought of gathering up and presenting. Now, the thought did occur to me that maybe when all is said and done, some of this data will turn out to have not been particularly useful. But unless you go off the deep end gathering data that's obviously irrelevant, it's helpful to have all of this here because that helps us to see. It may bring to mind some things that we hadn't thought of. The food map, for example. Although I quibble with the locations of some of the retailers on that map, nevertheless, the concept of areas of town where you have easier or more difficult access to food is an interesting concept to think about. I would have never thought of that myself. So there's some details there that I might want to refine, shall we say? The idea it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, so I just want to start by saying I really appreciate the work of CMRPC in getting this data collected and getting this together. I'm sure it's been no small effort to date, and there is, as Mr. Robbins noted, there's a lot here to dig into, and I think it's important to note kind of where in our master plan process this is coming. Obviously, we're at the very beginning with the data collection. I think doing it this three-part way presents some challenges, but also these unique opportunities where we're kind of collecting data that we don't know where we're going with yet. And I think that's kind of cool to the point of we're collecting things that we may not have thought of or may not have come up in the stakeholder engagement. What I'd encourage, I haven't been able to dig into too much detail, but from a broader perspective, and where we're going with this phase one, as we lead into phase two, I think there's going to be further refinement of this data, certainly, as we get to the stakeholder engagement and see what pieces we really want to dig deeper into. What I would encourage is to start to look at these data sets and to clump them together. When we look at the food resources and I think there was one on obesity and other health measures that were collected, we can start to look at how does that play into each other and how do we want to use these graphs together. And ultimately, I think what the goal for the board here should be with this data is to start to put together narratives after you've collected these into what are the pertinent issues that we see in the community as the board. What are we viewing? What's the narrative that we start to see coming out of the data? Let the data inform us of we didn't really think that we were this far ahead in this area or this far behind in this area. Maybe there's gaps that identifying issues that we may not have thought of. And I think that's where that's going to be the benefit in the second phase when we do the engagement with the public and with stakeholders, is to have this data and at least the preliminary narrative that we want to see and start to form for what is Grafton and where is Grafton going in the future. And then have that conversation with the residents and the stakeholders, and that's where that refinement's going to go even deeper. And I think we're going to see some really interesting results from that.
Yeah, one way I look at this is that sort of the outcome of all this data collection and a bit beyond that, because there's going to be some analysis and synthesis going on here. But ultimately, when we get into the engagement with the public, what story does this tell about Grafton? And that's really, so what story does this tell? And for the audience that's hearing this, how do we react to this story? What does this story tell us about where we might want to go? What does it tell? What does it suggest as a future direction for Grafton in the various areas that are covered by the plan? But if we can't tell a good coherent story, the public engagement's not going to be all that helpful.
I have a question about one of the slides. For the residential tax levy, is it possible to split that out by the zone, R40 versus R20, or is that not possible?
It may be. I have no idea, but I will try. So it's that's not my forte, unfortunately, but there'll be somebody on staff who can answer that.
I can confidently say that yes, we could slice and dice that data a lot of ways. I've done, as I said before, been paying a lot of attention to housing data over the last few months, particularly, and yeah, I've got a lot of this data downloaded and I've sliced and diced it all sorts of ways. But yeah, there's any number of ways you could present the data, and there's probably a number of useful views of that data that we haven't done here yet. But
yeah,
there's a lot of data there that we can deal with.
So from my perspective, so as we might have mentioned to you before, so at CMRPC, phased master plans are the name of the game these days. This is the first one we've had the privilege of working on that's been phased in this way. So, So, for example, we've never done the data analysis as a separate phase and then moved on to community engagement. So that for at least in my tenure as a master planner, I have never had the deliverable as in this way be the core deliverable. So and it's very important to us that you get what you're expecting and we get it right. So I'm very, very excited to get additional feedback, comments, thoughts, questions. Please perhaps send them to Chris and send them to me. There's, nothing too tedious. I really, really want to hear from you. So, in detail.
I, for one, I've got quite a lot that I'd be happy to send your way.
Wonderful.
Anything more we want to touch on this topic tonight? I'm quite happy with what I've seen so far. I'll say that.
Yep, I think we're off to a good start here.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I think I was looking at this and thinking how valuable a resource this is. Even now, I hope we'll be able to put what we have where people can find it, maybe on the website. But also, I thought about, gee, I wish we had these back, or this same kind of thing back years ago, be able to look at all these things in this much depth. Come a long ways.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll certainly start on the town web page. I'll start a project page for the master plan where we can post this and make sure that it starts to get sent out to the public. Obviously, we'll note that this is kind of the preliminary phases, but certainly putting the tools in the hands of the public, even in draft form, I think is pertinent to these processes to get that feedback from them as well, and let them to start to form those narratives too, as we move into that second phase. And I think to those points that were discussed, even the data that may not have been as useful now, I think this is stuff that's going to be useful, not just in the master planning phase. I could see us really starting to look, as we do even some of the other plans like the housing production plan and things like that, looking at stuff more deeply and using this in other ways, as well as just general analysis that the planning department will do. I think it's going to be really useful using a lot of this data in the future. So.
Yep, and you mentioned the housing production plan, which is in the process of being kicked off, an update for that, and that does overlap with quite a bit of the topic area of the master plan here. And one way or another, hopefully, we'll be able to leverage those two activities together. It may be, for example, that the housing production plan has a particular focus, that it's a somewhat narrower focus than the housing component of the master plan might be, because it's really focused on affordability, about housing affordability, and that's an issue of concern in the master plan as well. But the master plan's focus on housing is somewhat broader than the housing trust's focus. But given that there is a lot of overlap, that hopefully we can avoid a complete duplication of effort, but we'll see how that works out.
I'll be curious to see how the build out things work. I was around at CMRPC and here for the build out. What was it that was done statewide, town by town? Back was some reference seemed to say 2000, but somewhere quite a ways back. That was done differently, of course, but it tried to take into account where slopes were excessive and some of those things as to the developability.
Yeah, that's kind of another topic on the agenda here, is that build out analysis project.
Yeah, I'll speak to that at a different time. Yep.
Yep.
All right.
So is that everything for Dominique?
I think that is everything for Dominique. I think we're.
You'll hear more from us.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the board. See you soon.
Thank you.
All right. Now we'll circle back to what I tried to do earlier, the 48 Meadowbrook Road, 61A withdrawal. Do you want to lead us into it, Chris?
Yep. So this is the 61A request to withdraw portion of land at 48 Meadowbrook Road. I know the board is well aware of the 61A process. What the board has to consider tonight is a potential for recommendation to the select board, which would ultimately be the board to exercise a right of first refusal on the property, essentially seeking to begin the process of acquiring the property. I did take a look at the parcel 48 Meadowbrook. Note that it does connect to what is a landlocked parcel of, sorry, I have to look again if it was Grafton Land Trust or Conservation Commission, town-owned land. But certainly I think would have some form of conservation benefit. Again, how that relates to the value of the property would be something for the planning board tonight and the select board in the future to weigh and consider. I do note that there is at the front portion of the property some topographical challenges. Obviously, I always look at these for not only the potential for conservation benefit, but buildability and certainly unlocking a parcel that may be conducive to town expressed goals of development for affordable housing or other opportunities. I think the topographical challenges in this case would be significant. There's a bit of a 20-foot drop and significant drop off towards the rear, going towards the rear of the property that would have to be addressed. So I don't see this as really conducive to significant development in a way that may support that. But that is certainly something the board can consider as well.
Yeah, I would note for the record that the request is to withdraw 4,708 square feet from 61A, not the whole parcel.
My apologies.
As such, it's a slice of a corner of a piece of property that's being proposed to be transferred to an abutter. From my knowledge, the abutter receiving that triangle of land is doing so in order to get adequate frontage to do some things he wants to do.
Well, build a house or just do something with his current situation.
If memory serves, I had a conversation with Mr. Chalupka a while back, and my impression is he has a house on his parcel of land. He's looking to get enough frontage to divide his parcel into two to build another house on it. And he was looking for different ways to solve that problem, and this is where he ended up, apparently. Is he agreeing with his neighbor to acquire 4,708 square feet. It's actually more in the nature of a swap, because the neighbor who's giving up the 4,700 square feet is also receiving some property in return.
Yeah. Is there? My only thought is I know previously this board has had a slight question on the full validity of a 61A withdrawal when there's not a purchase and sale that specifies a dollar amount along with
That's
it.
the problem.
and we don't know if this, 4,008 square feet is, $4,708,000 for $1,000 a foot, or if it's, like a penny. There's no way to really know what the cost to the town would be of a recommendation to keep it.
Is it even a valid withdrawal if we don't have that?
Well, there is a purchase and sale agreement included with the application materials here.
I didn't see that. I saw the notice of intent to sell. I did not see a actual purchase and sale.
It's here. I'm looking at it.
Oh, did I totally miss it? I think I did. Well,
And how much is it?
Interesting that the dollar amount of the purchase and sale agreement is $1.
that would mean,
Oh, we can afford that.
yeah, we can pay $1 for it as a town.
Oh, yeah, let's. That's close to the, well, it's
Just
also quite close to the all of the conservation land and whatnot there. This is in the, I think this may actually be in the area of critical and environmental
Chris,
concern.
can you put that the plan up on the screen?
Yes.
Or I've got it on my screen. If you want, I can share.
I did allow the share if you already have it up. Apologize. I was.
All right. Let me see. That's it. So the parcel, the piece in question, it doesn't show up so well on this plan. Yeah, here it is. It's this little triangle right with small frontage on Merriam Road. It's that little triangle is this parcel here that my cursor is attempting to point out. Yeah, you can kind of see it. That's the 48 Meadowbrook. That's the 61A land, the 61A parcel in total. This little triangle is 61A. It's being transferred over to this land here. And the swap in the other direction is this. So you see the final layout is going to be more like this. So again, the triangle, the 61A triangle, 4,700 square feet is right here.
Yeah. So go back up a little bit, Dave, to the other one. There we are. And this is adding the triangle to where, to
the triangle is being added to this parcel here.
And the other land is not a withdrawal, but it is moving.
The rest of it is, this parcel is remaining in 61A.
Okay, can I point out something? It couldn't, that triangle would have to go over to the Chalupka house because if they took that out, it would be sitting too close to the lot line.
at least according to that drawing.
Yeah, so that's obviously the way that it has to be. That triangle goes to the already existing house.
Yep.
So it's not changing the buildability situation for a house.
It's not changing the buildability for the 61A parcel. The Chalupa house, adding this triangle, from my understanding, and I know I said their names wrong, but adding this triangle allows them to divide their land to add a second house on that parcel.
Right, so that they've got the frontage basically going from here to here right now.
Yeah.
Which is not quite enough for him to do what he wants, which is presumably to divide that and build a second house somewhere on the property.
How long is that? I had Map Geo up and I took it down. Well, for the current frontage.
Yeah, it doesn't show up real. It's
maybe too much trouble.
Yeah, I can't tell from here. But in any case, I can't imagine under any circumstances the town would be interested in acquiring this little 4,700 square foot triangle of 61A land.
Unless the town wanted to keep any more houses from being built right there.
Yeah, but
That's it, because the price is right.
I'm I'm
We could
hesitant to
offer
say
a
we're going
dollar
to
and
keep
a quarter.
I will say I'm hesitant to say that we should recommend a 4,000 square foot little triangle that doesn't connect to anything other than the road in order to keep the town from building a single house on a parcel that's not 61A. It doesn't really.
Let's say that and move on to the next item on the agenda.
Should we take a vote on that recommendation?
I move that the planning board recommend to the select board that the town not exercise its right of first refusal on this chapter 61A withdrawal.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried and we recommend not to acquire. Now, the next item on the agenda, the approval of the 2023 Planning Board meeting calendar and submission schedule.
I thought if we're publishing it this way with color or something, that there ought to be some sort of a legend or something that says these green and red ones are places that aren't having a meeting. If they're on the list, someone is going to get confused. But other than that, let's go for it.
So, my only question, I did email Prabhu asking him on this because I just did not know the answer, but does anyone know if traditionally celebrations with the Festival of Lights, the Diwali, is also, does that go across all 5 days of the Festival of Lights, or is that traditionally like the first day? I'm just trying to think of where next year it is November 12th is when that takes place. And our meeting would be next the second day of the November 13th. If anyone knows.
No clue.
I was talking to Linda about this earlier. How far do you go with not holding meetings because there's some sort of a celebration? Legal holidays, town meetings, yeah. But
my main thought is if there was a different day, a week before, a week after, that made sense. If that did conflict with a very commonly held celebration with the one subset of the population, it'd be worth trying to at least identify it and see if there was a more convenient time for the meeting to take place. But if we don't know, and Prabhu himself has not mentioned a concern with the meeting time, I don't think it's worth going into a what if situation. But
well, I mean,
so respectfully, I think obviously we're under no serious time constraints in relation of adopting this. I think that's a valid question to see if there is an easy accommodation for that. So respectfully, it's, if the board finds, we could certainly come back to this at the next meeting and, and ask that question of someone more, more
but I think if we adopt next year's calendar on November 14th, I don't think we'll be running into any difficult time constraints.
Right.
I do take Bob's suggestion that on the schedule, that something more than just the color should be made clear that these are dates when there is no planning board meeting.
Yeah, what we'll do, and for that, I'd like to do something. I know there's already the italics, but something with the formatting to make sure printable black and white as well.
Yeah, you might put them in brackets, for example.
Yeah,
something. But okay.
Maybe no colored dot. No, I don't know. Figure out something.
Yep, we'll do something. Yep.
Make it so.
It should be visually obvious that those are not planning board meetings.
Yeah, well, people who are desperate to get something done look there, and
And we always have the option to adjust our schedule as necessary for.
Yes, we always
usually do
schedules as needed. But this is our best estimate of what our plan will be.
So hearing no concern about addressing this tonight and no further discussion,
Punt that to the agenda for the next meeting.
Next meeting. And I'll move on to our discussion items, CMRPC build out analysis project.
Yep. So the CMRPC build out analysis project early, I don't remember. I think it was several months ago. CMRPC had sent out a request to see if communities were interested in having this done. Specifically, I think targeting communities that had done the previous build out analysis, as Mr. Hassinger noted. I expressed an interest. I think, certainly it's something that could be useful for the community. It also comes at no fiscal cost to the town. We're able to use staff hours to offset the local match. So it's almost no downside to participating in this, and very much upside in terms of the analysis that the community gets from it. So I expressed that interest, and sometime in October, CMRPC reached out and noted that they had received the grant funding to move ahead with this project quicker than they had anticipated, which is a good thing. So this is moving ahead a little bit ahead of schedule of what I think everyone anticipated. But as noted, the build out analysis, what it does is it looks at different zoning scenarios. We had the initial kickoff meeting where we discussed some of the nuances with that, what the previous communities had on record, and what CMRPC will be updating. It takes into account, certainly one of the scenarios takes into account site constraints such as topography and wetlands and other features that would render portions of land reasonably unbuildable. It also looks at a number of other scenarios, looking at build out with population growth, build out with changes to zoning such as smart growth. They are including this year the MBTA zoning and what that effect would look like for our build out analysis. So I think that this moving forward will be a relatively low lift and high value analysis project for the community, and anticipate moving ahead with it. So the build out analysis, just to go in a little bit more detail for those at home who may not be as familiar, what that does is it looks at the growth of housing, and what essentially what is already there, and what at full build out, i.e. the development of all the lots, what does that look like? One of the things in the kickoff meeting that they wanted to have us express to the communities, and a reminder is those numbers are going to be staggering. It's obviously, when you look at what is a full build out of a community, those numbers will certainly be look like a large impact. There's very little chance that full build out will be achieved in any near future, but it's certainly something that we want to keep track of what the development potential in the community is. So again, I think there's a lot of benefit to having that analysis. By participating in this analysis for 2 rounds now, rather than just having 1 data point, we'll now have 2 data points, which starts to build more of a trend that will, I think, allow this analysis to go even further. And I hope CMRPC, after completing this project, continues to do that in a reasonable timeline to keep that trend going and being analyzed, because I think that is important for communities to track, especially with, as we all know, the development that has regionally been impacting communities. So
I seem to remember that the number the last time, whenever it was done, was something like 30,000. A lot of things have changed, and I think the numbers may be bigger now than then. Although I don't know, because some of the land has been taken, so it'll be interesting to see. But do we need to do anything, or that's just going ahead?
Nope. Yeah, that's going ahead. I just wanted to bring it to the board's attention that we did that CMRPC received the funding and is moving forward, and I had expressed interest, and I'm going to continue unless the board says absolutely not. But
no, the alternative scenarios they're proposing here are very much in line with what I was hoping to see out of this. Because they're scenario one is sort of the standard, build out analysis under the existing zoning. Scenario two says, well, what about if we switch over to open space residential development, which is something that I think that we need to seriously look at that for a variety of reasons, but mainly because it's a mechanism to preserve more open space without ultimately sacrificing development. It's more of a it's, to put it somewhat imprecisely, it's mandatory flex. I mean, we all know how flex works, but it's essentially a mandatory version of that, which I think that will be interesting to explore. Scenario three is a much more focused on multifamily development, and that includes the MBTA zoning. So that's another scenario that I find very interesting. And then scenario four is sort of a combination. It's increasing density in some areas, reducing it in other areas, sustainable development principles. But those three alternative scenarios are all, I find that very interesting to sort of speculate. And ultimately they'll just be kind of guessing at what the zoning changes could look like, because they have to kind of pick the areas of town to use alternative zoning principles in. But nevertheless, the idea of exploring these alternatives is very much what I had hoped to see out of this.
They're doing this alongside the master plan, right? So they're both happening concurrently.
So somewhat. So it is a separate process, not really tied to the master plan, but I imagine that it'll be incorporated into the master plan. This will be completed on a much quicker timeline.
What is the timeline for this one? Is that on here? Did I miss it?
What?
We may be a little bit early for timeline for completion, but I'm trying to remember. I'd have to go back to my notes to see if they did say when they wanted to have it wrapped up. I imagine the grant has some timeline contingencies that they'll be following, but I don't have that top of mind.
Yeah, if it turns out that this data will be available before we're done with the master plan, it will be helpful for the master plan.
Yeah.
Because it was mentioned in the file that we got today. The scenarios you just referenced, Dave, were in the presentation, and I didn't quite know whether that's just saying, "Hey, this is coming," and here it is, it's going to fit in here. But anyway, okay.
Good.
Yeah, sounds good. Like a good project to hear more about as we get further. Our next agenda item, I'll move us along. Town meeting follow-up.
Thank you. So I just wanted to put this as a kind of a discussion item. Obviously, the members know how town meeting went, and I just wanted to touch on a few items and leave some space for discussion of how that wrapped up and kind of where we go from here in terms of the fallout from town meeting. So obviously the updates to 5.10, those were adopted successfully. So that Form 7 has been filed with the town clerk and will be sent off for final review with the AG's office. So that is well in process and well in hand. Obviously, the board voted or recommended the passover of the
Parking.
historic district parking. Thank you. Historic district parking regulations, and I think the discussion at that meeting in terms of direction is sufficient for moving forward. Obviously, I think we'll look to kind of clean up that language and make it more conducive to addressing the concerns that were expressed. And then finally, in terms of the mixed-use zoning in the commercial business and neighborhood business districts, certainly I was a little bit surprised from the concerns that were brought up, given the discussion of the board and I think the intent of that zoning. But certainly those are valid concerns, and I think it's important that the board take those into consideration. Certainly, having been defeated at town meeting, anything that's substantially similar would have to wait for the 2-year cool-off period. However, I think that there's probably ways to amend that language substantially to both address the concerns that were brought up in terms of larger mixed-use development projects, as well as being conducive to addressing the concerns, but also being in relation to reducing the threshold for the vote as well by using the 2020 economic development, which is specifically looks at allowing for accessory apartments. I note that accessory apartments in that zone are also not allowed in the commercial business or neighborhood business districts, and that may be more in line with what the board was.
Just as a point of clarification, the 2-year does not apply if the substantially similar one comes with a favorable planning board recommendation. However,
hence why we did that.
I think
they repeat the rule that if we give it a good report the next time,
yes,
it's okay.
Yeah, but okay. The rule is you can't bring something that got defeated. You can't bring essentially the same thing again without a favorable planning board report. But if the planning board supports it, you can come back next week and do it. But to follow on with what Chris said, my thoughts are much the same. That I wouldn't necessarily bring it back in the same form we did. I would want it to be more narrowly focused and make it clear that it's not a proposal to turn neighborhood business and community business into a village mixed-use district, which is what the discussion at town meetings seemed to be afraid of. Not that I would necessarily oppose making those more of a comprehensive mixed-use district, but that's not what this was about. So I think we can take another look at it, refine it, make it more narrowly focused around what we were actually trying to accomplish. Whether that's leveraging the accessory dwelling unit provisions or something else, we can figure that out. But I don't think we will have any trouble coming up with something that's much clearer as to what our actual intent is. I mean,
what was our intent?
Use it seemed like a convenient way to do that.
What was our intent? To have an accessory apartment allowed, or to allow a big development?
I think we would probably be more in line with rewording the article to the extent that we had initially envisioned it, and to make it such that we're not envisioning a giant development being in community business.
Yeah. But I'm asking what we thought. So, what were we thinking about accessory apartments?
Let's go back to what prompted this.
Yep. So I'll speak to my impression of what I was hoping that the zoning would accomplish, and to that point, I would probably speak to the presentation that I gave early on in the process, and perhaps the town meeting would have benefited from as well, to see that intent of what we were looking to accomplish. But at the time, I didn't think that it would meet such resistance. But having not heard any to that point. But what I was looking for the zoning to accomplish was more than simply just accessory apartments above commercial spaces. It was not the intent to necessarily encourage, large mixed use development with significant, potential impacts. Although, again, I'll note that, it was under the special permit criteria, and the board would have full authority to review those projects had it passed. But really, I think in terms of larger mixed-use development projects that we were looking to encourage or to support was, again, really looking at those pre-existing uses. And again, I'll use the example of One Grafton Common that has or had at some point apartments above and local mom and pop shops below. And I think that's really what the intent was, to support those existing uses, allow for the potential new development of projects if they fit in those areas, but then certainly the smaller businesses of the small business with an accessory apartment above. That said, I think town meeting did speak, and I did hear those concerns. I think they spoke with the vote, and hearing that, I think it's important, as the board discussed tonight, to reconsider how we form the zoning language to be conducive to those concerns. So I think there is a way to do that, but that was my intent, or my impression of the intent of that zoning.
And I'd say moving forward, we ought to be thinking in terms of what we would like to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
What's the scope of what we would like to allow?
Mm-hmm.
And if we get a better handle on what it is we want to accomplish, we can then develop some zoning language that is pretty clearly limited to the scope we intend.
Yeah. Let's wait till we get there.
Yeah.
We're threatening the 10 o'clock barrier here.
I will just simply add that, as far as I'm concerned as well, I think it'd be good to try for us to have something more nailed down in terms for May, as well as when we do either just before or like when we're getting it ready for the public hearing or public meeting, I should say, for those warrant articles, to do an explicit reach out to some people of town who spoke at town meeting on it.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Mr. Trahan, who started off the discussion, that is granted to be for anyone to attend anyway, but an explicit invitation just because he and others made comments regarding that. It would be probably beneficial to them and us.
Yeah, I think there was a problem. People, not sure that there's enough notice that goes out anymore for our hearings on zoning law, zoning changes. I bet you there wasn't one person in 100 that had the slightest idea of what that was on the, well, once the warrant is published, our hearing is gone and we've decided.
Yeah.
So we ought to think about all of that, but things are going to be different soon, players and whatnot. And I think maybe we need to wait until it's time.
All right, is that everything on town meeting follow-up tonight? Looks to be. We have bills.
Move we pay them.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the bills. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Miss Hassinger.
Aye.
And I vote aye for bills to be paid. Our next agenda item is minutes of previous meeting, October 17th. This was our town meeting minutes, so this was not televised.
Move the board approve the minutes of October 17th as drafted.
A motion
Second.
and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. Staff report.
Thank you. So I'll be fairly brief. As the board, I'm sure, is well aware, this will be my last meeting with you. I am moving on to a new position. With that said, I am working very diligently to make sure that the board and the town is set up sufficiently to make sure that things, the transition to whoever fills the role is smooth. To that point, I did meet with Evan and prospective interim planner this afternoon. So those discussions are moving forward, and I think we will have an interim planner in place within short order. Certainly very qualified. I'll let the relevant parties address that at that appropriate time. I'm also working to draft essentially a list of ongoing projects with recommendations and kind of next steps for all the various projects that we have going on in the planning department and the board. So I will have that put together, and I'll be distributing that out to the various boards that the planning department helps the staff for their comments. If there's anything that needs to be added or adjusted, I'm happy to do that. I hope that'll give, not just the boards and other municipal staff kind of a snapshot of where we are and where we're going, and an ability to stay on track, but whoever fills the role will be able to pick that up and move forward very quickly and get up to speed. I've also offered to help assist with that process as well, obviously on a limited basis, as I'll have other responsibilities, but certainly where I'm able to, I'm happy to assist in bringing whoever fills the role up to speed, and certainly in terms of helping to recruit and fill that role.
Yeah, you might have something like a full-time job or something to pay attention to.
Yes. Yep. But certainly definitely want to support the town and in that transition. I feel very fortunate to have been able to be given the opportunity to work in the town of Grafton. I've really enjoyed my time, and I've really enjoyed working specifically with the boards and each one of you in terms of all the things that we've worked on, and too numerous to list here tonight. But thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's been our privilege to have worked with you these past couple of years. I imagine, speaking for myself and probably for others, we really wish you could have stayed with us longer. However, we wish you all the best in your next position here, and continued success in your career.
Thank you.
You will be missed.
You're not mentioning where you're going, are you, Chris?
So I accepted the position of Director of Planning and Economic Development in Shrewsbury. So I'll be just next door. You guys will be able to come knock.
Yeah, I know. Grafton is, I think, the official farm team.
Yeah.
Where, our first town administrator went there, and we provided at least one other town administrator. This is getting to be I don't know about this. But I am a little concerned. As you talk, you have a lot of things in mind, context, and where things need to go and whatnot. And we lose that. And I've been here for every one of our planner changes. I had to shake Peter Lowett's hand at town meeting. That was when he left, back in the dark ages. I think I sent to you, sounds like a great opportunity for you moving forward.
Yeah.
It's not the first time that one of our planners has moved forward to bigger and better things. So thank you.
Yeah. And I do hope, and that's why I'll send along the that list of projects that I'm working on with their description, and hopefully that will give some context. I do hope to pass along some of that context and knowledge to the next person, and which they can throw out the window if they if they see fit. But hopefully that'll allow them to at least see where I was going with things in a little more detail.
And I will say for the board's knowledge as well that Evan did express a interest in having the board. I'll lean to the microphone for Bob. Evan did express an interest in having a member of the board involved in the hiring process for our permanent hire.
That's up to the town administrator.
Yep.
Yep.
He did express interest.
How that work has varied substantially
Yes.
over the years, shall we say.
Anything more
Enough
worth
said.
calling out? Well, staff report. Correspondence. Anyone see something they wanted to discuss?
No. Move we adjourn.
I have
Second.
I have a
Oh,
motion.
no, we have reports from
Yes.
our committee.
Representatives and town committees.
You withdraw your motion to adjourn?
Yes. Well, it wasn't seconded, was it?
It was.
Oh, unfortunately. Anyways, withdrawn. I don't have anything to report.
Neither do I.
And I do not either. So now
Move we adjourn.
I have a motion
Second.
and a second.
And the second.
This is non-debatable. Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Miss Hassinger,
Aye.
and I vote aye. We are adjourned.